Tommy Sullivan had 3 minutes to save a life he'd never met, using warmth he couldn't afford to lose. For 23 months, the 13-year-old had survived Montana winters in an abandoned van, invisible to hundreds who walked past him daily. What he discovered in that alley, and what he sacrificed to save her, would unleash 180 Hell's Angels and a reckoning nobody saw coming. This is Tommy and Wolf's story, and it will prove that sometimes the most broken person in the room is exactly who a child needs. Subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. But before we continue, think about this. Tommy was homeless for 23 months. He walked past hundreds of people every single day. Every single one looked away. The question is, when you see someone invisible, will you be the person who finally sees them? Please, take her. She's freezing. She needs help. The words came out in fragments, teeth chattering so violently Tommy could barely form consonants. His lips had gone past blue into a grayish white that meant his body was shutting down, prioritizing core organs over extremities, the way his father had taught him during survival training back when Dad was still alive, to teach him anything. Captain James Morrison stood in the doorway of Fire Station 3, warm air spilling out behind him into the brutal Montana night, and stared at the scene that would later be described in medical reports as miraculous timing. A teenage boy, rail-thin, wearing nothing but a gray hoodie in 15-degree weather, holding a small child wrapped in a navy blue coat, 4 sizes too big for her. The boy's hands were shaking so badly he could barely maintain his grip. His face had gone pale, except for 2 bright red spots on his cheeks that Morrison recognized immediately as the precursor to severe frostbite. Morrison had been a firefighter for 19 years. Before that, Army medic in Iraq. He'd seen hypothermia dozens of times, knew the stages, knew the timeline. This kid had maybe 90 minutes before his core temperature dropped below 90 degrees. After that, cardiac arrest became probable. The child in the boy's arms whimpered, her small voice cutting through the wind that howled down Industrial Drive. "Cold," she whispered. "Want Papa." Tommy tried to hand her forward, his arms trembling from more than just the temperature. Lily Patterson, 4 years old, wearing pink fleece pajamas with unicorns and snow boots she hadn't bothered to tie before walking out of her house 22 minutes ago, clung to Tommy's neck with the desperate grip of a child who'd found safety and refused to let go. "Son," Morrison said, stepping outside without grabbing his coat, because instinct told him this kid was about to bolt and there wasn't time for jackets. "You're coming inside too." Tommy shook his head, backing away. 3 shuffling steps in boots so oversized they were stuffed with newspaper for insulation. The newspaper rustled with each movement, a sound Morrison would remember months later when testifying about this night. "No," Tommy managed. Can't. They'll—" He didn't finish. His legs gave out. Morrison caught him before he hit the frozen concrete. Caught both of them, actually. The boy who weighed maybe 90 pounds, soaking wet, and the little girl who'd stopped crying the moment the warm air from the station touched her face. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway behind Morrison, took one look, and started shouting for blankets and the medical kit. Inside, under fluorescent lights that made every injury visible, Morrison got his first real look at what 23 months of homelessness did to a 13-year-old body. The boy's fingers had whitish-gray patches at the tips. Old frostbite damage, permanent. His face showed bone structure too prominently, cheekbones and jawline sharp in a way that spoke of chronic malnutrition. Dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. When Rodriguez cut away the hoodie to check core temperature, they found dog tags on a chain around his neck. Sergeant First Class Michael Red Sullivan. Blood type O positive. Protestant. Morrison, who'd served, who'd lost brothers in Iraq, who knew what those tags meant, felt something shift in his chest. The little girl was hypothermic, but stable. Body temperature 94.8 GF. Fingers and toes showing early frostbite, confused and scared, but alive. The boy was worse. Core temp 93.1 DGF. Respiratory infection causing a wet rattle with every breath. So dehydrated the paramedic couldn't find a vein for the IV on the first 3 attempts. Kid saved her life, the paramedic said quietly, watching the boy's vitals on the monitor. Another 10, maybe 15 minutes, and she'd have lost consciousness. He gave her his only coat and carried her 4 blocks in this weather. Probably knew it might kill him. Morrison sat beside the gurney where they'd laid Tommy, now wrapped in thermal blankets, still shivering despite the heat. The boy's eyes were open but unfocused, that 1,000-yard stare Morrison had seen in combat veterans, the look of someone who'd survived too much. "Tommy," Morrison said softly, the name from the dog tags. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes shifted, focused. Dark brown, like the photo Morrison would later see of Sergeant Sullivan. Tommy nodded once. "That little girl is going to be fine because of you," Morrison continued. "The paramedics are warming her up. Her name's Lily. She's asking about the coat boy who helped her. But I need to know, where's your family? Who do we call?" The wall went up instantly. Morrison saw it happen, saw the boy's face close off, saw fear replace the brief moment of relief. "Don't have one." Tommy's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Dad died, Afghanistan, 2 years ago. Mom died after. Overdose. Been alone since then." "Alone where?" Morrison kept his voice gentle, the way he'd learned to talk to combat victims going into shock. "Where have you been living, son?" The boy's hand moved under the blankets, touched the dog tags through the thermal wrap. A comfort gesture, something he'd done so many times it was automatic. "Van," Tommy said. "Behind the lumber yard on Industrial. It's abandoned, broken windows, no heat. But it's somewhere." Rodriguez exchanged a look with Morrison. Industrial Road, 3 blocks from here. The kid had been sleeping 3 blocks away in a vehicle with no heat during a Montana winter where temperatures regularly hit 20 degrees. "For how long?" Morrison asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. 23 months. The words came out flat, emotionless. "Since the group home kicked me out. I was there for 11 months before that, after Mom died and CPS took me. Director said I had behavioral issues, said I was violent. Wasn't true, but nobody asked me. Just threw me out. Middle of winter last year. I've been on the street since then." Morrison's jaw tightened. "What group home?" Tommy looked away, staring at the ceiling tiles. "Riverside Youth Group Home. Director's name is Martin Voss. Everyone thinks he's great. Board member. Gives speeches about helping kids. But he's not. He's—" The boy stopped, breathing hard. The cough came then, wet and rattling, the sound of an infection that had gone untreated for weeks. When it finally subsided, Tommy's eyes were wet. "He starves the kids," Tommy said quietly. "Keeps the heat at 62 to save dollars. If you complain, if you stand up for younger kids, he labels you a problem and kicks you out. That's what happened to me. This older kid was hurting a little boy, Marcus, and I stopped him. Voss expelled me for violence. But here's the thing. Tommy's hand moved to the pocket of his jeans, pulled out a battered smartphone with a cracked screen. No service, Morrison noticed. Just a device someone had thrown away and this kid had salvaged. "I recorded him," Tommy said. 2 weeks before he kicked me out. He and the clinical director were talking in the parking lot. Didn't know I was in my van nearby. They were talking about billing the state for kids who aren't there anymore. Said they've made over $2.5 million by discharging kids and keeping the payments. Called us throwaways and system garbage. Said nobody cares if we disappear. He held up the phone with shaking hands. "I have the whole conversation. 11 minutes. Names, amounts, everything. But I'm scared if I tell anyone they'll say I'm lying. Because who believes a homeless kid over a man like him?" Morrison took the phone carefully. "May I?" Tommy nodded. The video was dark, shot from inside a vehicle looking out at a silver Lexus 2 parking spaces away. The audio was surprisingly clear. Morrison pressed play. The voice that came through was warm, professional, the kind of voice you'd trust with children. 27 months, Roger. 27 months and we're sitting on 2.5 million. Can you believe we pulled this off?" Morrison's blood went cold as he listened. Listened to Martin Voss laugh about ghost kids. Listened to him call children system garbage. Listened to him detail exactly how he'd built a scheme that stole from the most vulnerable population in the state. When the video ended, Morrison looked at Tommy Sullivan, this 13-year-old boy who'd survived 2 years in hell and still had the courage to give his only coat to a freezing stranger. "How many kids?" Morrison asked quietly. "How many has he kicked out?" 34 that I know of," Tommy said. "In the last 2 years. Most of them younger than me. I see some of them sometimes on the streets. We don't talk much, but we recognize each other, the ones who got thrown away." Morrison stood up. He was 6'2", 220 pounds. Former Army medic who'd seen too much death in Iraq. Lost his younger brother to a drug overdose 8 years ago. His brother who'd been homeless when he died, his brother Morrison hadn't saved. He wasn't going to fail another kid. Morrison pulled out his phone, dialed a number he'd called maybe twice in his life. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Wolf, it's Jim Morrison. Station 3. Jim." Robert Wolf Patterson, 67 years old, founder member of the Billings Hells Angels chapter, Marine Corps veteran with a Bronze Star from Vietnam. "Little late for a social call. I need every brother within 50 miles at the station. Now!" Silence on the other end. 3 seconds of it, which in biker time meant Wolf was already moving, already grabbing his keys, already calculating who to call. "What's going on?" Morrison looked at Tommy, at the dog tags around the boy's neck, at Lily Patterson sleeping in the next room wrapped in blankets and dreaming of her papa, who was about to learn his granddaughter had nearly died. "Your granddaughter wandered out of her house tonight, 4 years old, wearing pajamas in Fitindijus weather. A homeless kid found her in an alley, gave her his only coat, carried her 4 blocks here. Saved her life. Kid's 13. Been living in a van for 2 years. And the man who's supposed to be protecting kids like him has been running a scam that's stolen millions. We're not waiting for the system to take its time on this one." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Say no more. We're coming." The line went dead. Morrison turned back to Tommy, who was watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Listen to me," Morrison said, and his voice had that steel in it that came from years of giving orders in combat zones and fire scenes. "Your father served this country. He died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tonight, you did the same thing. You gave up your only coat to save a stranger's child, knowing it might kill you. That makes you a hero, and heroes don't get left behind. He put a hand on Tommy's shoulder, gentle but firm, the way you claim someone. I don't care if Martin Voss is president of the Rotary Club. He hurt you. He hurt dozens of other kids. He stole dollars meant to feed orphans, and he's going to pay for it. You have proof? Then we're going to the police, the FBI, the media, everyone. We're going to burn his whole operation down. Tommy's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for 23 months. My brother died homeless, Morrison said quietly. I couldn't save him. But I can save you. You're not going back to the streets. You're not going back to that group home. You're under my protection now. He extended his hand, palm up, offering. And one more thing. That little girl you saved? Her grandfather is the man I just called. When he gets here, when he finds out you saved his granddaughter's life, you're going to have 180 bikers making sure nobody ever hurts you again. Tommy placed his hand in Morrison's. His hand was small and cold and shaking. Morrison closed his other hand over it, complete enclosure, warmth, protection. Your father would be so proud of you, son. I'm going to make sure you get the life he wanted for you. That's when Tommy broke, sobbing into Morrison's chest, all the grief and fear and loneliness pouring out in waves, 23 months of surviving alone, of being invisible, of believing he was exactly what Voss had called him. Throwaway. System garbage. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Jim, the little girl's awake. She's asking for the boy with the coat. Morrison, still holding Tommy, nodded. They brought Lily over, still wrapped in blankets, her color better now, her eyes bright and searching. She saw Tommy and reached for him with a small hand. Coat boy! Tommy wiped his tears, took her hand. You're safe now, okay? These are good people. Lily studied him seriously. You cold. You need coat back. Tommy tried to smile. The first smile Morrison had seen from him. You keep it, sweetie. I'm okay now. And for the first time in 23 months, Tommy Sullivan actually believed it. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 17 degrees Celsius. Wind chill made it feel like 30 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that killed people, especially people without shelter, without coats, without hope. But inside Station 3, wrapped in thermal blankets, holding a little girl's hand while a firefighter who'd claimed him as family made calls that would change everything, Tommy was warm. The rumble started low, distant, like thunder on a winter night when thunder made no sense. Then it grew. Morrison stepped outside, watched the headlights appear at the end of Industrial Drive. 1 motorcycle, then 5, then 20, then too many to count. A river of chrome and leather rolling toward the station in disciplined formation, the sound of their engines shaking windows up and down the street. 180 motorcycles. Every Hells Angels member in Montana who could get to Billings had dropped everything and come. The formation pulled in, tight and practiced, parking in perfect rows in the overflow lot across the street. Engines died almost in unison, the sudden silence after all that thunder feeling heavy and expectant. One man dismounted first. Tall, gray beard, wearing a black leather vest with patches that told a story of 46 years in the club, of Vietnam, of a life lived on 2 wheels, and according to a code most people didn't understand. Robert Wolf Patterson walked toward the station. Morrison met him halfway. Where is she? Wolf's voice was granite. Inside, stable, warming up, mild hypothermia, Early frostbite on fingers and toes, but she's going to be fine. Wolf's shoulders dropped an inch. Relief. Then his eyes went hard again. "Where's the boy?" "Inside with her. Won't let go of his hand." "I want to meet him." Morrison led Wolf inside, through the bay where fire trucks sat quiet, into the small medical room where Tommy sat wrapped in blankets next to Lily's gurney. The boy looked up, saw the massive biker in full colors, and froze. Every instinct Tommy had developed in 23 months on the streets screamed danger. Big man, angry expression, tattoos covering both arms. This was the kind of person you avoided, the kind you ran from. But then Wolf Patterson did something Tommy never expected. He knelt, dropped to one knee beside Tommy's chair, putting himself at eye level with the boy, making himself smaller, less threatening. His eyes, pale blue and fierce, softened as he looked at Tommy's face, at the frostbite scars and hollow cheeks and dog tags. "You're Tommy," Wolf said. His voice was still rough but gentle now, the way you talk to wounded things. "Jim told me what you did." Tommy nodded, couldn't speak. Wolf reached out slowly, giving Tommy time to pull away if he wanted, and touched the dog tags around the boy's neck. "Your father was Army," Wolf said. "Ranger?" "Yes, sir." Tommy's voice cracked. "He died in Kabul, IED, 37 months ago." "I'm sorry, son. I'm a Marine. Vietnam. Different war, same sacrifice." Wolf's thumb rubbed the metal tags gently. "He taught you to protect others, didn't he? Even when it costs you everything." Tommy's eyes filled again. "He used to say, 'Never leave a fallen comrade.' But I think he'd be disappointed. I've been living in a van. I'm nobody. I'm just—" "Stop." Wolf's voice cracked like a whip, but not angry, commanding. "You are not nobody. You found my granddaughter dying in an alley and you gave her your only protection. You carried her 4 blocks in cold that would kill most grown men. You made sure she was safe before you'd let anyone help you. Your father wouldn't be disappointed, Tommy Sullivan. He'd be proud as hell." Wolf stood, turned to the assembled firefighters. "I want the name of the man who hurt this boy. I want his address. And I want to know every single detail about what he's done." Morrison handed over Tommy's phone. "It's all on here. 11-minute recording. Voss and his clinical director bragging about embezzling $2.5 million from the state by billing for kids they've discharged. Tommy has names, amounts, everything." Wolf listened to the recording once. His face went from stone to fury to something colder and more dangerous. When it finished, he looked at the gathered brothers who'd followed him inside. Gunnar, his younger son, and a former MP investigator. Doc Wright, an ER physician who rode with the club. Professor Moss, ex-CPS worker who knew the system inside out. Torch Ramos, computer forensics specialist. "Gentlemen," Wolf said quietly, "we have work to do." Now you might be thinking a Hells Angels founder hears his granddaughter almost died, and his first move is to organize a systematic evidence-gathering operation. That's not the story you expected, is it? Everyone assumes bikers mean chaos, violence, scores settled with fists. But Wolf Patterson was 67 years old. He'd been a Marine when he was 19. Earned a Bronze Star in Vietnam for saving 3 men under fire. Came home and founded a motorcycle club built on Brotherhood, and a code that said, "You protect your own, and you protect the innocent." 46 years in the club had taught him something most people never learned. Real power isn't loud, it's precise. Gunner, Wolf turned to his son. You're going to coordinate with Billings PD and the FBI. This recording is evidence in a felony case. We need chain of custody, proper documentation, everything by the book. Already on it, Gunner said, phone out. I've got contacts at the Bureau. They'll want this. Doc, Wolf continued, examine Tommy. I want a comprehensive medical report documenting every injury, every sign of neglect, everything. Make it so detailed even a blind prosecutor could build a case. Doc Wright moved to Tommy's side, gentle hands checking the boy's vitals while making notes on a tablet. Professor, Wolf said, you know Montana's group home regulations. I want a list of every single violation Voss committed, every licensing requirement he broke, every law he bent. Make it ironclad. Professor Moss was already pulling up documents on his phone. The food stipend alone. If he's billing full and serving partial, that's fraud on multiple counts. And discharging minors without proper protocol, that's a licensing violation that should shut him down immediately. Torch. Wolf turned to the youngest of his specialists, a lean man in his late 30s with sharp eyes behind glasses. That phone has evidence. I need you to make copies, authenticate the recording, pull any deleted files. Can you do it without compromising the original? Give me 2 hours, Torch said, taking the phone carefully. I'll have full forensic documentation and backups on 3 separate secure drives. Wolf looked at Morrison. Jim, how long until Amanda gets here? Your daughter? She's finishing her shift at the hospital. Should be here in 20 minutes. Wolf nodded, then turned back to Tommy, who'd been watching this military-style precision briefing with growing amazement. Here's what's going to happen, Wolf said, kneeling again to meet Tommy's eyes. You're not going back to that van tonight. You're not going back to the streets. Amanda, my daughter, Lily's mom, she's an ER nurse. She's got a spare room. You'll stay with us until we figure out something permanent. I can't, Tommy started. Yes, you can. Wolf's voice left no room for argument. You saved my granddaughter's life. That makes you family. In my world, family doesn't sleep in abandoned vehicles in 17 GUF weather. Family has a bed, food, safety. Understood? Tommy nodded, overwhelmed. Good. Now, about Voss. Wolf stood, addressed the room. We do this right. Legal. By the book. No threats, no intimidation, no violence. We gather evidence. We build a case so airtight even the best lawyer in Montana can't defend it. And we make sure every single child he's hurt gets justice. He paused, looked around at the assembled bikers. But we do it fast. Because every day that man operates is another day kids are suffering. I want evidence gathered, witnesses interviewed, and a complete case file delivered to the FBI within 48 hours. Questions? Silence. Then every head nodded. Then let's ride. By dawn, the rumble had become a legend. 200 motorcycles didn't just appear in Billings, Montana. They announced themselves, rolling through downtown in formation so tight you could measure the gaps between bikes in inches, not feet. The sound shook windows 3 blocks away. Car alarms triggered. People came out of their houses to watch, pulling robes tight against the cold, pointing at the river of chrome and leather flowing down South 29th Street. Headed straight for Riverside Youth Group Home. Martin Voss was drinking his morning coffee when the first engine note reached him through the walls of his private office. He looked up from the spreadsheet on his laptop. The real one, the one that showed actual census versus reported census, the one he'd been admiring because this month's ghost resident count was up to 14 kids, which meant an extra $78,750 in his pocket. The rumble grew louder. Voss stood, walked to the window, and felt his stomach drop. They filled the entire parking lot. Rows and rows of motorcycles, parked with military precision. Men in leather vests bearing the same patch dismounting in synchronized movements. No shouting, no chaos. Just disciplined, terrifying silence as 200 bikers stood there, arms crossed, waiting. At the front, a tall man with a gray beard walked toward the entrance with 5 others flanking him. Voss's hands started shaking. He knew who that was. Everyone in Billings knew Wolf Patterson. The front door opened. Voss heard it from his office, heard the voice of his receptionist stammering something, heard boots on linoleum coming down the hall. Then Wolf Patterson stood in his doorway. "Martin Voss?" Wolf's voice was calm, conversational even. "Yes, I'm calling the police." Voss reached for his phone. "Already here." Wolf gestured out the window. 3 Billings PD cruisers had pulled up, officers standing beside them, not intervening, just watching. "Detective Sarah Chen is an old friend. I called her an hour ago, told her we'd be conducting a peaceful evidence-gathering operation and would she mind keeping the peace. She agreed." Wolf stepped inside, followed by Gunner, Professor Moss, and a third man Voss didn't recognize carrying a tablet and looking official. "What is this?" Voss demanded, trying to sound authoritative and hearing his voice crack instead. "This," Wolf said, "is accountability." Professor Moss pulled out a document, handed it to Voss. "Montana Child and Family Services Licensing Inspection. We're authorized under State Regulation 37.47.713 to conduct an unannounced facility review based on credible allegations of abuse and financial fraud." Voss scanned the document. It was real. Signed by a state supervisor. Dated this morning, 6:47 a.m. "You can't just—" "We can," Professor Moss said calmly. "And we are. You have the right to refuse, at which point your license will be immediately suspended and all children removed. Or you can cooperate, and perhaps this goes easier for you." Voss's mind raced. The laptop, the files, the dual ledger system. He needed to... "Looking for this?" The third man, Torch, held up Voss's laptop. "Removed from your desk 3 minutes ago under authority of the inspection warrant. Don't worry, we'll take excellent care of it." Voss felt the walls closing in. Outside, the operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Doc Wright was interviewing children, gentle and patient, documenting everything in medical terminology that would hold up in court. A 9-year-old girl named Sarah described being hungry constantly, showed him the locks on the food pantry. An 11-year-old boy named Marcus talked about sleeping in a room where his breath formed clouds because the heat was kept so low. "What temperature?" Doc asked gently. "Mr. Voss says 62, Marcus said. "But sometimes it feels colder. My roommate and me, we share blankets because one each isn't enough." Doc made notes, documented temperatures, photographed the thermostat, built evidence. In the parking lot, Gunner was interviewing neighbors. The woman across the street, Patricia Morrison, 44 years old, had lived there for 6 years. She'd watched the group home, seen things, said nothing. Until now. "I knew something was wrong," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "I saw those children's faces in the windows. I heard crying at night in summer when windows were open. I watched Mr. Voss arrive in that expensive Lexus while kids wore coats with holes in them. But he was so respected. I thought maybe I was imagining things." Her hands twisted together, guilt written in every line of her face. "I should have trusted my instincts. I should have called someone. I'm so sorry." "You're calling now," Gunner said, not unkindly. Tell me everything you saw." She did. Dates, times, specific incidents. A child locked outside in winter as punishment. Another child who disappeared suddenly, gone overnight without explanation. The pattern of expensive purchases Voss made, new car, home renovations, while the facility looked more run down each year. Inside the facility kitchen, brothers were documenting food supplies. The pantry that should have been stocked for 31 children, Voss's reported census, held enough food for maybe 15. The locked cabinet revealed name-brand snacks, good cuts of meat, fresh fruit, all items meant for the children, but clearly being taken home by staff. One biker, a former teacher named Scholar Dave Matthews, photographed everything. Serial numbers on food delivery invoices. Dates. Quantities ordered versus quantities present. The math didn't add up. It never did when someone was stealing. In the office, Professor Moss was going through filing cabinets with the methodical precision of someone who'd worked in the system for 22 years. "Here," he said, pulling a folder. "Destiny Martinez, 15 years old. File shows she was discharged October 2024 for aggressive behavior posing safety risk to other residents." He opened another folder, this one from the financial records Torch had pulled from Voss's laptop. "But you kept billing for her until January 2025. 3 months. At $187.50 per day, that's $17,062.50 you collected for a child who wasn't here." Voss said nothing. His lawyer, called 20 minutes ago, racing to get here, had told him not to speak. Professor Moss pulled another file. Marcus Webb, 8 years old, discharged July 2024. Official reason, failed to respond to therapeutic interventions. You billed for him until September. That's $13,687.50. Another file. Ashley Johnson, 14, discharged May 2025, billed until August, $17,062.50. The numbers piled up, folder after folder, child after child, 34 in total. "Preliminary calculation," Professor Moss said, looking at Torch's laptop where the forensic accountant had been running numbers, "puts your fraudulent billing at just over $487,000 in the last 2 years alone. And that's just the ghost residents. We haven't even gotten to the supply fraud yet." Wolf stood by the window, watching his brothers work. No violence, no threats, just documentation. Evidence. The truth, carefully collected and preserved for prosecutors who would need every detail. This was how you destroyed someone who'd hurt children. Not with fists, with facts. A car pulled up outside. A woman in her late 40s emerged, looking confused and frightened. Linda Hayes, CPS supervisor, Karen Mills's boss. Gunner intercepted her, introduced himself, explained the situation. "I need to see the files," Linda said, her face going pale. "All the cases Mills closed involving this facility." They pulled them. 17 cases in 2 years, all marked unfounded. Complaints about inadequate food, insufficient heat, staff abuse, medical neglect. All investigated by Karen Mills, all dismissed. "Oh my God," Linda whispered, reading through them. The signs were there. Mills closed 17 cases. That should have triggered automatic review. I should have caught this. She looked up at Gunner, tears in her eyes. "I failed these children. I trusted my worker. I didn't dig deeper. Every one of these cases deserved a real investigation, and they got nothing." "You're digging now," Gunner said. "Tell me about Mills. How long has she worked for you? 6 years. Always seemed competent. Maybe a little friendly with some facility directors, but I thought she was just building rapport. Linda paused, pulled up her phone, scrolled through emails. Wait, look at this. She showed Gunnar an email from Mills, dated 3 months ago, recommending Riverside for a County Excellence Award. The email praised Voss's innovative programming and dedication to difficult-to-place youth. The same facility where children were starving and freezing. Where is Mills now? Gunnar asked. Called in sick today. First time in 3 years. Gunnar and Wolf exchanged looks. Not a coincidence. By 9 a.m. they'd found the smoking gun. Not the recording Tommy had made. That was already with the FBI. This was something else, something even Voss hadn't expected them to find. In the locked supply closet, behind boxes of institutional toilet paper, Torch discovered a small fireproof safe. Voss claimed he didn't have the combination. Torch smiled, pulled out a tablet, and ran a digital lock-breaking program. The safe opened in 4 minutes. Inside, 3 ledgers. Handwritten. The real books. Torch photographed every page while Professor Moss read over his shoulder, his expression darkening with each entry. He's been doing this for 27 months, Professor Moss said quietly. But there's something else here. Look at this entry from March 2022. The entry read, J. Sullivan discharge. Continuation billing protocol, 90 days. Wolf came over, looked at the name. Sullivan. Like Tommy? Jennifer Sullivan, Professor Moss said, pulling up records on his tablet. Tommy's mother. She was a resident here briefly, in a transitional family program Voss ran until 2022. She was discharged 3 months before she overdosed. He kept reading, his face going white. Voss billed the state for her care for 90 days after she left, just like he did with the kids. But there's another entry here, from 2 months before she died, a note about a life insurance policy. Wolf's jaw tightened. What kind of note? Professor Moss turned the ledger so Wolf could see. The entry, in Voss's handwriting, J. Sullivan, 180K policy paid out to estate, collected for discharge fees owed, remainder to operating account. He took her life insurance, Wolf said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. A woman who overdosed, leaving behind a 10-year-old son, and Voss claimed her insurance payout for fees. It gets worse, Professor Moss said. Look 3 pages back. April 2021. Same pattern. Different name. R. Martinez, 125K policy paid out. They kept finding them. 4 previous residents who'd died. Overdoses, accidents, illnesses, all within months of being discharged from Riverside. All with life insurance policies that somehow ended up in Voss's hands. He's not just stealing from the state, Gunnar said, his MP training kicking in as he photographed the ledgers. He's targeting vulnerable people with insurance, getting them to sign over beneficiary rights as part of their residency agreements, then discharging them into situations where they're likely to die. That's not fraud. That's murder, Wolf finished. Maybe not legally, but morally. He's killing them through neglect and profiting from their deaths. The room went silent. Outside, more witnesses had come forward. Franklin Chen, 53, former clinical director at the facility, had been working up the courage for 18 months. He'd resigned in March 2024, citing ethical concerns. He'd been complicit in the earlier stages of the scheme, had helped Voss falsify records, had taken his share of the proceeds. But when he'd seen Voss discharge 8-year-old Marcus in the middle of winter, something in him broke. "I knew what Martin was doing," Franklin said, sitting in one of the police cruisers, giving his statement to Detective Chen. "I helped him for a while because I needed the job. But when I saw him kick that little boy out, I couldn't do it anymore. I quit. I should have reported him then. I was a coward." His hands shook as he signed the witness statement. "These children deserved better. I failed them. But I'll testify. I'll tell prosecutors everything. Everything." At 11:53 a.m., barely 6 hours after the bikers had arrived, FBI agents pulled up to Riverside Youth Group home. Special Agent Marcus Stone, White Collar Crime Division, took one look at the organized evidence collection, the documented witness statements, the forensic accounting, and the ledgers from the safe, and actually smiled. "This," he said to Wolf, "is the most complete white-collar crime case file I've seen in 15 years. Usually we spend months digging for this level of documentation." "We had motivation," Wolf said simply. Stone turned to Voss, who sat in his office surrounded by FBI agents, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. "Martin Jeffrey Voss," Stone said formally. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of federal funds, child endangerment, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." The agents led him out in handcuffs. Voss, who'd spent 9 years building a reputation as a pillar of the community, who'd given speeches about helping troubled youth, who'd accepted humanitarian award nominations, walked past 200 silent bikers in his driveway. Not one of them moved. Not one spoke. They just watched. Witness to his fall. When the cruiser doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, taking Voss toward a future that included federal prison and the destruction of everything he'd built on stolen backs, Wolf turned to his assembled brothers. "Cleanup detail," he said. "These kids need food, heat, and stability until the state can make proper arrangements. Doc, coordinate with CPS to get medical evaluations for everyone. Professor, work with Linda Hayes to ensure qualified interim staff. Torch, secure all evidence and deliver copies to Stone." He paused, looked at the building that had been a prison disguised as a home. "And someone call a damn HVAC company. Get that heat up to 72 degrees. These kids are done being cold." The room where they'd been holding the interview broke into movement. Not chaos, choreography. Each brother knowing his role, executing with precision. By 2 p.m., the facility temperature had been raised. The kitchen had been restocked with proper food, not from Voss's budget, but from donations that materialized when word spread through the biker community about what had been found. Hot meals were being prepared. Children who'd been perpetually hungry were eating real food, as much as they wanted. Marcus, the 11-year-old who'd shared blankets with his roommate, sat at a table with a plate piled high with spaghetti and meatballs, tears running down his face. "Is this real?" he asked Doc Wright, who was doing medical evaluations in the dining room. "Can I really eat all of this?" "All of it," Doc said gently. "And seconds if you want them." Marcus ate like he'd never seen food before, because for months he essentially hadn't. By 4 p.m., Karen Mills, the CPS worker who'd taken bribes, who'd closed 17 legitimate complaints, who'd protected Voss in exchange for monthly payments, was arrested at her home by FBI agents who'd tracked the deposits to her bank account. $500 a month for 22 months. $11,000 to look the other way while children suffered. She cried during her arrest, said she hadn't known it was that bad, said she'd thought she was just helping reduce bureaucracy. No one believed her. At 6 p.m., as winter darkness fell over Billings and the temperature dropped to 19 degrees outside, the children of Riverside Youth Group home were warm, fed, and safe for the first time in years. 31 children, ranging from age 6 to 17, who'd survived in a system designed to protect them but corrupted by greed. They didn't understand everything that had happened. They didn't know about forensic accounting or federal wire fraud statutes or the intricacies of embezzlement schemes. But they understood that the scary-looking bikers in leather vests had done what teachers, counselors, social workers, and police hadn't. They'd listened. They'd believed. They'd acted. And in one 6-hour operation, conducted with military precision and zero violence, they'd freed 31 children from hell. 3 months is both forever and no time at all when you're learning what safety feels like. Tommy Sullivan sat at the kitchen table in Amanda Patterson's house on Highline Drive, finishing his 3rd bowl of oatmeal. Real oatmeal, with brown sugar and raisins, not the watery institutional gruel Voss had served at Riverside. His body was still catching up, still learning that food would be there tomorrow, that he didn't need to eat until his stomach hurt because this might be the only meal for days. Amanda, Wolf's daughter, and an ER nurse who understood trauma in ways most people couldn't, had learned not to comment on how much Tommy ate. Just kept the pot warm on the stove and smiled when he came back for more. Lily sat across from him, coloring a picture of motorcycles. She'd drawn 180 of them, or tried to. The page was mostly scribbles, but she'd counted them out loud as she drew. At 4 years old, she didn't fully understand what had happened that night in December, but she understood that Tommy was the coat boy who'd saved her. And that made him the most important person in her world after Papa Wolf and Mama. "Tommy," she said seriously, holding up a purple crayon, "this one is you." "I'm a motorcycle?" Tommy asked, smiling. The smiles came easier now, after 3 months of safety. "No, silly. You ride a motorcycle with Papa. He said when you're bigger." Amanda caught Tommy's eye over Lily's head, her expression soft. Wolf had indeed said that, had told Tommy, 2 weeks after Riverside shut down, that when the boy turned 16, he'd teach him to ride, that he'd earn his own bike through the club's youth mentorship program, that he had a place in this family if he wanted it. Tommy had cried. Again. He cried a lot those first few weeks, making up for 23 months of holding everything inside. The phone rang. Amanda answered, listened, her face brightening. "He did? That's wonderful. Yes, I'll tell him. Thank you, Dr. Wright." She hung up, turned to Tommy. "Your latest blood work came back. Protein levels are almost normal. You've gained 11 pounds. Everything is heading in the right direction." 11 pounds in 3 months. Tommy was up to 100 pounds now, still underweight for his height, but no longer in the danger zone. His frostbite scars were permanent, the nerve damage irreversible, but Doc Wright had fitted him with special gloves that helped protect his damaged fingertips from future injury. The respiratory infection had finally cleared after 2 rounds of antibiotics. The night terrors were less frequent. Healing didn't work on a schedule, but it was happening. The doorbell rang. Wolf answered it, came back with Professor Moss, who was carrying a folder thick with documents. "Tommy," Professor said, settling into the chair beside him, "I wanted to update you on where things stand with the case." Tommy set down his spoon, nodded. He'd been part of the investigation from the beginning, had given testimony to FBI agents, had watched his recording become Exhibit A in a federal prosecution that was making headlines across Montana. "Martin Voss pled guilty 3 days ago," Professor said. "Took a deal to avoid trial. He's been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and child endangerment. No parole eligibility for 12 years. Tommy absorbed this. 18 years. Voss was 51. He'd be 69 before he could even apply for parole. Karen Mills got 8 years, Professor continued. She pled guilty to accepting bribes and official misconduct. The state also revoked her social work license permanently. What about the other kids? Tommy asked. The ones he kicked out before me? Professor's expression softened. That's the good part. We found all 34 of them. Well, 33. One boy, David Patterson, no relation to Wolf, is still missing. But we have people looking. The others are all in safe placements now. Real ones. We've been working with the state to completely overhaul the group home licensing system. He pulled out a document, showed Tommy. This is House Bill 847, the Riverside Reform Act. It's named after the facility, but really it's named after you. After what you survived, and what you had the courage to report, it requires monthly unannounced inspections of all residential facilities, financial audits every quarter instead of annually, mandatory reporting by medical professionals who treat residents, a state hotline where kids can report abuse anonymously, criminal background checks for all staff, updated yearly, and it creates a youth advocacy board, kids who've been through the system helping oversee it. Tommy stared at the document. Because of me? Because of you, Professor confirmed. The bill passed unanimously last week. Governor signed it 2 days ago. Every group home in Montana is being inspected right now. 3 more facilities have already been shut down for violations. Dozens of kids are being moved to better placements. He paused, met Tommy's eyes. You saved more than Lily that night, son. You saved hundreds of children who would have suffered in a broken system. That recording, your willingness to speak up even when you were terrified, that changed everything. Amanda put a hand on Tommy's shoulder. Your father would be incredibly proud. Tommy touched the dog tags under his shirt. He wore them outside now, visible, a connection to the man who'd taught him what honor meant. The door opened again. Gunnar came in, followed by a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. She introduced herself as Margaret Chen, family court magistrate. Tommy, she said kindly, I have some paperwork that requires your signature. Well, your agreement, since you're still a minor. Amanda and Wolf Patterson have petitioned to become your legal guardians. Permanent placement, not foster care. Full guardianship rights. Tommy looked at Amanda, at Wolf who'd appeared in the doorway, at Lily, who was watching with wide eyes. You want to keep me? His voice cracked. Not just until the case is over? Wolf crossed the room, knelt beside Tommy's chair the way he had that first night at the fire station. Tommy Sullivan, you saved my granddaughter's life. You brought down a criminal who'd hurt dozens of children. You showed more courage than most grown men I know. But more than any of that, you're a good kid. Kind, brave, honest. Amanda and I talked about this. We want you here. Permanently. As part of this family. He reached up, took the dog tags that hung around Tommy's neck, held them gently. Your father can't be here to raise you, but I can. And I'll do my best to raise you the way he would have wanted. With honor, with strength, with love. Tommy couldn't speak. Just nodded, tears streaming down his face. Magistrate Chen smiled, produced documents. Then let's make it official. 6 months after that terrible December night, the parking lot of Riverside Youth Group Home, now closed permanently, the building slated for demolition, hosted a very different gathering. 180 motorcycles again. But this time, they were arranged in a circle around a small stage. The occasion was the official launch of Angel's Watch, a new non-profit organization founded and funded by the Hells Angels Montana chapters. The mission? Protect vulnerable children through direct intervention, advocacy, and systemic reform. Wolf stood at the podium, his cut bearing new patches that marked him as the organization's president. Beside him stood Tommy, wearing a leather vest that Wolf had commissioned. Not full colors, not yet, but a vest that marked him as under the club's protection. On the back, protected by angels. 3 years ago, Wolf said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowd of 500 people. Bikers, social workers, politicians, community members, media. My granddaughter wandered out of her house in pajamas during a 15 night. She should have died. But a 13-year-old homeless boy found her, gave her his only coat, and saved her life. He gestured to Tommy, who stood straighter despite his nervousness. That boy had been failed by every system designed to protect children. Failed by a group home director who saw kids as profit margins. Failed by a social worker who took bribes to look the other way. Failed by a community that knew something was wrong but stayed silent. Wolf's voice hardened. But he wasn't failed by his father, who taught him honor before dying in service to his country. And he wasn't failed by his own conscience, which told him that a little girl's life mattered more than his own comfort. Tommy Sullivan saved my granddaughter. Then he saved 34 other children by having the courage to come forward with evidence of systemic abuse. The crowd applauded. Tommy's cheeks flushed. Angel's Watch exists because of Tommy, Wolf continued. Because we looked at what happened and said, never again. In the last 6 months, we've established direct hotlines in 47 schools across Montana where kids can report abuse anonymously. Funded legal advocates for 83 children navigating the foster system. Provided emergency housing assistance to 12 families to prevent kids entering care due to poverty alone. Partnered with law enforcement on 6 investigations into institutional abuse, resulting in 3 facility closures and 9 arrests. Raised $347,000 through chapters across the western states for child welfare programs. He paused, looked at the assembled crowd. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The story is in the faces. The 11-year-old boy who finally has enough to eat. The teenage girl who's in a placement that respects her identity. The 8-year-old who doesn't flinch when adults raise their voices because he's learning that not all adults hurt children. Wolf turned to Tommy. This young man taught us something. He taught us that protection isn't about size or strength or how scary you look in leather. It's about seeing someone who needs help and deciding their life matters more than your convenience. He had nothing, no home, no family, barely any food. And he still gave everything to save a stranger. The crowd was silent, hundreds of people listening. That's what Angel's Watch is about, seeing the children everyone else overlooks, the system kids, the runaways, the ones labeled as problems because they've been traumatized and don't know how to ask for help the right way. We see them, we protect them, and we hold accountable anyone who hurts them. Wolf looked directly at the cameras, at the reporters who'd covered the Riverside scandal for months. To every child watching this, every kid who's in a situation like Tommy was, you are not garbage. You are not a throwaway. You matter. And there are people who will fight for you. Call our hotline. Tell your story. We will listen. We will believe you. And we will act. He stepped back, gestured for Tommy to come forward. Tommy approached the microphone, terrified. Public speaking had never been his strength. But Wolf put a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm, and Tommy found his voice. "My dad used to say, 'Never leave a fallen comrade,'" Tommy began, his voice shaking but growing stronger. He was talking about soldiers, but I think it applies to everyone, to kids who are falling through cracks in systems that should catch them, to people who need help but are too scared to ask. He looked out at the crowd, saw faces he recognized. Doc Wright, who'd treated his frostbite and malnutrition. Professor Moss, who'd documented every violation at Riverside. Gunner, who'd coordinated with the FBI. Firefighter Morrison, who'd been the first to claim him as family. And 180 bikers who'd dropped everything to help a child they'd never met. "I was homeless for 23 months, Tommy said. I was invisible. People walked past me every day and didn't see me, or they saw me and decided I wasn't their problem. I learned what it feels like to be erased." His hand touched the dog tags outside his vest. "But my dad also taught me that you don't measure a person by what they have. You measure them by what they do when it matters. I didn't have anything that night I found Lily, but I had a choice. I could walk away, keep my coat, protect myself, or I could give her a chance to live." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "It wasn't brave. It was just the only thing that made sense. She was 4 years old and freezing to death. What kind of person would I be if I left her there?" He looked at Wolf, at Amanda standing in the crowd holding Lily's hand, at the family who'd claimed him when he had nothing to offer but truth and trauma. "I'm standing here today because these people decided I mattered. They looked at a homeless kid with a broken phone and a terrible story, and they believed me. They acted. They changed everything." Tommy turned back to the crowd, found the words he'd been practicing. "If you're a kid, and you're in trouble, you matter. Tell someone. Keep telling until someone listens. I know it's scary. I know you think nobody will believe you. But there are people who will. People like Wolf and the Angels. People like Captain Morrison. People who understand that protecting children is the most important thing adults can do." He paused, wiped his eyes. "And if you're an adult, pay attention. Listen when a child hesitates. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Care enough to intervene, even if your voice shakes. Because I promise you there's a kid somewhere right now who needs exactly what you can give. Don't let them be invisible." The applause was thunderous. Tommy stepped back, overwhelmed, and Wolf pulled him into a hug. Around them, 180 bikers, men who'd seen combat, who'd survived loss, who'd built Brotherhood on principles of loyalty and protection, gave a standing ovation to a 13-year-old boy who'd taught them what courage really meant. 1 year after the December night that changed everything, Tommy Sullivan stood in the kitchen he now thought of as home, making breakfast for Lily while Amanda got ready for her hospital shift. He'd turned 14 2 months ago. The birthday party Wolf had thrown involved 50 bikers, a massive chocolate cake, and more presents than Tommy had received in his entire life. He'd cried, of course. That was allowed now. Feelings were allowed. He'd gained 27 pounds, bringing him to 116 pounds, finally in the healthy range for his height. His grades at Billings West High School were straight A's. He'd made the honor roll every semester, joined the debate team, volunteered at the hospital on weekends, helping in the pediatric ward because he understood scared kids in ways most volunteers didn't. The nightmares still came sometimes. PTSD didn't disappear on a schedule, but they were less frequent. And when they woke him at 3 a.m., he could walk down the hall to Wolf and Amanda's room, and they'd talk until dawn if he needed them to. He had a therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who specialized in childhood trauma. They met twice a week, talked about loss, about survival, about the guilt Tommy still carried for being the one who got out, while 33 other kids had suffered longer. "You can't save everyone," Dr. Kim had told him gently. "But you can honor their experience by using your voice, by making sure their stories lead to change." Tommy was doing that. He'd testified before the state legislature about group home reform, had been interviewed by 3 newspapers and 2 TV stations, had become, reluctantly, the face of a movement to protect foster youth. He didn't want to be famous, but he wanted to matter, wanted his suffering to count for something. Lily appeared in the doorway, wearing her school backpack and the pink coat that had replaced the pajamas she'd worn that terrible night. The coat Tommy had given her. His father's coat, really, the one that had been 4 sizes too big, was framed now, hanging in Wolf's garage alongside photos of Tommy and Lily from that first night at the fire station. A reminder, a memorial, a promise kept. "Ready for school?" Tommy asked. Lily nodded, grabbed his hand. They walked together these days, Tommy to the high school bus stop, Lily to the elementary school 2 blocks away where Amanda would pick her up. The morning routine had become Tommy's favorite part of the day. Normal. Safe. Family. At the bus stop, 3 other kids waited. They knew Tommy's story. Everyone in Billings did, but they'd learned to just treat him like a regular kid. That's what he'd asked for. Not pity. Not special treatment, just normal. The bus arrived. Tommy climbed on, took his usual seat near the back, pulled out his homework, AP English essay about heroism in literature. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed. A text from Gunner. "Court verdict came through. Voss's appeal denied. 18 years stands. It's over." Tommy stared at the message. Over. The man who'd hurt him, who'd stolen from 34 children, who'd built wealth on their suffering, would spend nearly 2 decades in prison. Justice. It didn't undo the damage, didn't erase 23 months of homelessness or the scars on Tommy's fingertips or the nightmares he still had. But it meant something. It meant the system had worked, finally, when people cared enough to make it work. He texted back, "Thank you for everything." Gunner's response was immediate. "You did the hard part, kid. You survived. You spoke up. You saved lives. We just backed you up. That's what family does." Family. Tommy looked out the bus window at Billings rolling past. The city that had been so hostile when he was homeless, so cold and indifferent, now felt different. Or maybe he felt different, less invisible, less alone. He had a home, a family, a future that stretched beyond survival. His father would be proud, Wolf had said. Tommy believed that now. Believed that Sergeant Sullivan, somewhere, somehow, knew his son had carried forward the values he'd taught. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Never leave a fallen comrade. Honor matters more than comfort. Tommy touched the dog tags under his shirt, felt the metal warm from his body heat. "I'm okay, Dad," he whispered. Finally, "I'm okay." The message. This story isn't really about bikers or patches or motorcycles that shake windows when they roll through town in formation. It's about something simpler and more important than that. It's about seeing. Every day, in every community, there are children like Tommy Sullivan. Kids falling through cracks in systems designed to catch them. Kids who are invisible because we've learned to look away, to convince ourselves that someone else will handle it, that it's not our responsibility. Tommy was homeless for 23 months. He walked past hundreds of people every single day. People who saw him and decided he wasn't their problem. People who maybe felt bad but didn't act. People who convinced themselves that surely someone official, someone with authority, someone with resources would step in. Nobody did. Until one terrible night when Tommy found a freezing 4-year-old and made a choice that defied every survival instinct. He gave away the only protection he had. He carried her to safety, knowing it might cost him his life. And in doing so, he set in motion a series of events that would expose corruption, save dozens of children, and prove that sometimes the most powerless person in a room has the most power to change everything. The Hell's Angels who responded to Wolf's call didn't have to help. They could have said this was a job for police, for social services, for official channels. They could have stayed home, stayed out of it, avoided the complexity and legal risk of intervening in a child welfare case. But they didn't. Because they understood something most people forget. Protection isn't just for the strong. It's especially for the vulnerable. And brotherhood means you show up when it costs you something. 200 bikers spent 48 hours gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, documenting abuse, and building a case so thorough that federal prosecutors called it one of the best white-collar crime files they'd ever seen. They did it without violence, without intimidation, with nothing but disciplined determination to ensure children received justice. That's not the story most people expect from men in leather vests covered in patches. But expectations are often wrong. The scariest-looking people in a room are sometimes the gentlest protectors. The most broken survivors sometimes show the greatest courage. And the smallest act of kindness, giving a coat to a freezing child, can trigger a reckoning that changes everything. If you've ever felt invisible, this story is for you. You matter. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Keep speaking until someone listens. There are people like Wolf and Morrison and Doc and Professor out there. People who will believe you. People who will act. If you're a child in trouble right now, in a home that isn't safe, or a system that isn't protecting you, tell someone. Keep telling. Call hotlines. Talk to teachers, counselors, neighbors, anyone. Don't stop until someone helps. You deserve safety. You deserve protection. You deserve a life where you're not afraid. And if you're an adult reading this, hearing this, watching this, pay attention. Listen when a child hesitates before answering a simple question. Notice when a kid at school always seems hungry, always wears the same clothes, always has bruises they explain away. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Care enough to call someone if something feels wrong. You don't need 200 motorcycles to change a story. You just need to see a child who needs help and decide they matter more than your convenience. Patricia Morrison, the neighbor who lived across from Riverside for 6 years, saw children crying at night and convinced herself she was imagining things because the director seemed so respectable. She carries that guilt now. Wishes she'd trusted her instincts. Wishes she'd made a phone call that could have ended suffering years earlier. Don't be Patricia. Be Morrison, the firefighter who saw a freezing kid and immediately claimed him as family. Be Wolf, who dropped everything to protect not just his granddaughter, but a stranger who'd saved her. Be Doc, or Gunner, or Professor, who used their skills to ensure justice prevailed. Be Tommy, who had nothing and gave everything because a child's life mattered more than his own survival. Angels Watch, the organization born from this story, has helped over 400 children in its first year. Not because bikers have special powers, but because they decided to pay attention, to listen, to act. They've prevented 6 child trafficking operations through early intervention. They've provided emergency housing to 23 families, keeping kids out of the foster system when poverty was the only issue. They've funded legal advocates who've overturned 14 wrongful custody decisions. The numbers matter, but the faces matter more. The 11-year-old who finally has enough to eat. The teenage girl who's in a placement that respects who she is. The 8-year-old who's learning that adults can be safe. Every one of them is a life that mattered enough for someone to intervene. Martin Voss is in federal prison. Karen Mills lost her license and her freedom. Riverside Youth Group Home is rubble. The system that allowed them to operate has been reformed, not perfectly, but better, with monthly inspections and youth advocacy boards and anonymous hotlines. None of that brings back the 23 months Tommy spent homeless, doesn't undo the frostbite scars, or the night terrors, or the years of his childhood stolen by a man who saw children as dollar signs. But it means the next child won't suffer the same way. It means systems have changed. It means Tommy's voice, his recording, his testimony, his courage, saved lives beyond the one he carried through. Weather. That's what speaking up does. It ripples. It spreads. It changes things. So speak up. Pay attention. Intervene. Be the person who sees invisible children and makes them visible. Be the adult who believes kids when they're brave enough to tell the truth. Be the voice that refuses to stay silent when silence allows harm. You don't need a motorcycle. You don't need a leather vest. You don't need to be big or strong or frightening. You just need to care. And then act like it. If this story moved you, subscribe to Night of the Road for more stories proving that heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they wear leather and ride thunder. Comment below. Who was your protector growing up? Or what do you wish someone had done for you? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let's make invisible children visible. Together. Tommy Sullivan is 14 years old now. He's safe. He's loved. He's thriving. And somewhere, Sergeant First Class Michael "Red" Sullivan, who died protecting others in a desert half a world away, is proud of the son he raised. The son who learned that real courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and acting anyway. Because someone needs you to.